So this session is titled Strengthening and Renewing Religious Institutions. Our wonderful panelists are very thoughtful and engaging, and I hope that you'll see a lot of the threads that have been talked about today coming back together again here, and they'll make sense of them all for us, right? Solve all the problems. But we have wonderful, wonderful speakers. The way we had this session envisioned is we've asked Ann Snyder, who's editor-in-chief of Comment magazine, to sort of take some time and lay out a vision of where we go from here and what the concerns are and what can be done. Ann is a deep and a broad thinker who really focuses on morally formative institutions like churches. She's just perfect for this. She's, as I mentioned, the editor-in-chief of Comment magazine, and she's the host of Breaking Ground, which is a collaborative web commons that was developed during the COVID era to bring cross-section of thinkers together and look at the pandemic times with ingenuity, wisdom, and courage. And then they published a book at it, which sadly I don't have, but it's called Breaking Ground, Charting Our Future. Highly recommend. She's also host of the Whole Person Revolution podcast, author of The Fabric of Character, A Wise Giver's Guide to Renewing Our Social and Moral Landscape. From 2016 to 2019, she directed the Philanthropy Roundtable's Character Initiative, program helping American foundations and business leaders strengthen this sort of middle ring of morally formative institutions, churches, and other groups that make a difference. She's also worked with the H.E. Butt Family Foundation in Texas, with the Ethics and Public Policy Center, World Affairs Journal, and New York Times. In her spare time, right? She's published widely, including the Atlantic Monthly, the Washington Post, City Journal, Orange County Register, Houston Business Journal, and on and on and on. At any rate, you can see why, and you'll be able to hear why we picked her to speak. After she's had a chance to sort of lay out some initial ideas, we've got two respondents who we're really thrilled about too. On my left is Daryl Paul Lobban, who's the director of, did I pronounce that right? Lobban. I'm sorry, I should ask you first. Who's the director of faith partnerships for Stand Together. And I don't know if all of you know Stand Together, but it's a philanthropic community that is sort of one of the leading groups trying to help bridge gaps in contemporary culture, help people who are the change makers to address some of the most difficult problems in the U.S. Daryl's a third-generation ordained minister. He's served in 7 different denominations: Pentecostal, UCC, RCA, AME, and Baptist churches. Has been involved internationally with mission trips and lectures. He's lectured at Oxford and Gordon College, and he's a senior fellow at the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute in Washington, D.C., as well as serving on the pastoral leadership staff for the Mount Olivet Baptist Church in Arlington, Virginia, my home. That's where I came from. You got to put that in there. And our other respondent is Bob Smietana, who is a national writer for Religion News Service. He, in addition to covering, as he puts it, evangelicals' weird religion and the changing religious landscape. I'm not sure whether we're the weird religion or the changing religious landscape. Weird. It's a little bit of a joke. There you go. He's won awards for his reporting, and editing. He's spent 2 decades covering breaking news, data journalism, investigative reporting, profiles. He's served as a senior writer for Facts and Trends, senior editor of Christianity Today, religion writer at the Tennessean, and on and on. But what he's also just recently done, which is very apropos to this panel and this conference, is a book called Reorganized Religion, looking at the reshaping of the American church and why it matters. So you've already heard more than enough from me. At this point, I will give the floor to Ann, and as she ends, we'll take some time from our respondents to hear from each of them. So please.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's wonderful to be back in Utah. So in the summer of 2020, several months into COVID and a month or so after George Floyd's death, I took out a blank page and wrote 4 anguished words, very large, at the top of a Word document. And they were, "Church, where are you?" A pharmacy was burning down the street where my husband and I live in DC. There were gunshots in our alleyway. I was watching and experiencing, like many of you, vastly unequal experiences of the pandemic. Some of us enjoying the reprieve from the demands of meritocratically layered social capital, others having to work in frontline capacities, dying per surname or neighborhood block in unfathomable proportions. After the lockdown means faded and real life got more dire, social media, of course, could not respond to this with any degree of poise, but rather became more and more obnoxious. Its seductions to peacock one's own moral rectitude almost laughable were it not for the terrible vacuum of inspired leadership the Instagram sermons were only too happy to fill. It seemed the only people speaking were either mindless conformists or angry protesters, both unhealthy, both unable to resist the gravity of self. The desperate words on my part, "Church, where are you?" were part accusation, part lament, part exasperation, part sincere plea, but also at its core, an expression of soul-searching of my own responsibilities as a Christian, implicated in the seeming invisibility, or worse, perversion, of this grace-giving organ that should be resounding with truth and love. But what or where was this organ known as the church anymore? Was it even accurate to speak of the church in our American context as a coherent thing? I understood that local churches, my own very much included, were being gouged of their incarnate lifeblood through government lockdowns, a first in American history and no small wound. But where was creativity beyond simply the pragmatic pivot to survive? Most churches opting to convert the Sunday service into a virtual experience to hold congregants' attention, but few speaking compellingly about the path of corporate sacrifice and service of the larger polity. I was just longing to see moral leadership emanate with cruciform power. I was longing to see connective tissue woven between churches and police departments and social service agencies and businesses locale to locale. But few of these collaborative, common good stories rose to the narrative surface. Only conspiracies, demonization, political violence, and pious punditry did. Where was the ingenious, Christianly original leadership animated by a tradition that hangs everything on Christ's open wound, and whose body we, his followers, are thus empowered to sight and reach the suffering, hopefully before our secular friends? Was our own storehouse really so useless, dusty from decades of misguided deposits? Was a reduced gospel all that Americans, both inside and outside the church, had come to know? I'm not throwing cheap shots from the peanut gallery here. To lament the church's weakness and complain about its cowardice is to confess my own unease and ecclesial flimsiness as a Christian trying to be faithful to the call of God and community, while also seeking to navigate, like all of you, today's complexity, speed, autonomy, and change. We all know the statistics about the steady decline in church attendance since 2000, about the rise of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, about the litany of pain and trauma that more and more people accuse religion of bringing into their lives, about the transience of congregations. It's natural for religious professionals to hem and haw over these trends, for journalists to analyze them, and for wounded secularists to celebrate them. But I think there's something deeper going on, one rooted in this particular juncture of history that we are living through, that has implications for how those of us who see the gift that religious institutions are and can yet be think about shaping them, renewing them, and protecting them. I was unusually impacted earlier this year by a book whose title barely captures the profundity of the author's analysis. That author is a professor by the name of Andrew Root, and the book is titled simply The Congregation in a Secular Age. In this volume, which is one of a trilogy devoted to understanding the unique pressures afflicting religious life and practice in the West today, Root describes an encounter with a North Dakota pastor whose church, in the wake of COVID, seems flat, depressed. We talk about falling behind, about needing change, this North Dakota pastor told Root in late 2020. It's all we discuss at our regional meetings, but no one seems to know what that change needs to be. And worse, I'm convinced no one has the energy. It's like we're stuck in mud or trapped underwater, and we just don't have the energy to face it. Face what? The author, Root, asked. Anything at all, the pastor responded. Maybe even the energy to be the church. People still show up on Sunday morning, but to get them to care or invest in anything else is impossible. We've tried everything. Root describes the broader context, quote, "This North Dakota congregation was insulated from the supposed liberal ethos that undercuts the civic importance of religion, and yet it was as depressed as any declining city church in Philadelphia." The pastor continued in his observations, quote, "I mean, these should be exciting times. Everyone knows we need change, but instead of creating energy, it creates depression. It's like we're unable to be any more than a church that shows up on Sunday morning. This congregation is essentially a country club, and I cannot break that mentality. I don't think it's because these are bad or selfish people. They're lovely. As a church, we're just depressed." This little anecdote put words to my growing sadness on Sundays over the last number of years. I see and frankly get to write about so much civic ingenuity, correct human anthropology, and wholly generative mischief emanating from faith-animated organizations in American civil society writ large. Faith-shaped rehab communities for addicts, Christian colleges leading the way on new business models for higher ed, faith-filled police officers reframing the national debate about police brutality, mental health, and racial bias. But somehow I experience so little of that same vitality and power in the actual institution of the church, of our congregations. Catholics have the Eucharist, but otherwise I would say a pretty depressing level of passivity in too many pews. Evangelicals offer increasingly mediocre sermons that take their primary cues either from politics, sports, or Hollywood. The main line seems unsure of what they do and don't believe. And the Black church is struggling with its own demographic cliff as African American elders whose faith forged in the intermingling of God's justice and civic progress haven't somehow been able to meet the cynicism and pain of a younger generation struggling to maintain historical patience. I know that this staleness didn't start crackling over COVID. If I had more time today, I would try to narrate a complex American religious and cultural history that would begin in the late 50s and early 60s with a deeper backdrop, of course, of the Enlightenment shaft and Western mindsets. But there was something about this pandemic that just revealed a dry plateau. Who, outside of, tellingly, immigrant churches in these United States, and perhaps the sustained organizational genius of Latter-day Saints, who, besides these, is offering that sacred container for an original, alternative reality in the world to breathe and flourish, an animating force that might puncture our ideological frames and release the power and radical claim of the gospel? Have so many churches somehow dried up into shells whose inner oysters of God-breathed poetic and prophetic life been killed by outside indifference, internal dissension, lack of proper preparedness on the part of pastors to hear and preach anything more than a relevant gospel that is so watery and unrooted so as to be manipulated by technological, political, and cultural powers untouched by its invitation to become a citizen of a new, beatitudinal country? Something is just going on in the twilight of whatever 1960s revolution began displacing trust in religious institutions some 60 years ago. And something is also going on as we hover around the 75-year anniversary of the building of so many post-World War II institutions, many of which were rooted in a reckoning with the need to protect human dignity, but that are now experiencing a great crack-up. SoulCycle and a healthy workplace may nourish one's psychic and social needs for a little while, but I'm not sure either is enough. We are in some time between times, and nobody that I know at least knows quite what comes next. There is the problem of freedom, which, taking a page as someone does in a conference like this from Charles Taylor and Alistair McIntyre, we Americans interpret as ever greater autonomy and self-expression. Everything is choice now: our relationships, our gender, our identity, truth itself. We pursue an ever fuller spray of options in our physical, material, and social futures, hoping to find the right place for us, to meet the people we really want to live with, to occupy a job that actually satisfies, to find a religion which can truly be ours. Slowly but surely, in the midst of overwhelm, our fear of mortality, and a somewhat earned distrust in the institutions that have historically helped shrink the menu of options and provided a pathway to live out lives of formation and service in the present moment, but also with responsible bridges to the past and to the future, we find ourselves cut off from the reality that there is more than our individual identity projects and the race to harvest resources for some undefined dream. We don't know how to say that there could be more than the ethic of authenticity. Then there is the problem of time. How fast it seems change is constantly flipping us in this society, how impossible it is to keep up. I myself am daily discombobulated by the shifting sacred cows in our public discourse, while just also suffering bandwidth depletion from 1,000 demands in 1,000 directions. I strike a lot of noble things, I hope, off the day's task list, but I grasp in vain for the support of a more organic village wheel that could cohere the many spokes of my giving and receiving into a whole shared with others, to unfold my labors and loves into meaningful yet also manageable interdependence. Before modernity, the good life was fused with substantive traditions and practices that called for duty. We had more limited, human-scaled, responsive lives. Now, in an age that often pants before the idol of innovation, but is atrophied in any articulacy of moral purpose or questions of why, we not only have to create our own identities, but we somehow have to do the lion's share of the work ourselves in maintaining a coherent self in a constantly moving environment. This kind of individualized pressure is very tiring, and it pushes us both collectively and as individuals into anxiety and depression. So part of what I'm trying to clarify here is a question. What happens to the whoop and wharf of religious institutions when we, its members, are existing inside a time famine, and when our prevailing culture tells us to reject the notion that some goods in life might actually be given? What happens when we are encouraged to interrogate and deconstruct every given thing, sometimes throwing it all into the bonfires of revolution and progress, sometimes stripping it all down and then rewiring the given into a new but often chaotic collage oriented not toward the reweaving of our common life, but rather to satisfy some faint expression of the self? What happens when we have to create reality, to create, in a sense, God by ourselves? I don't have answers, unfortunately. In fact, I'm kind of overwhelmed by the stakes of the question I'm asking you and asking myself, but I can speak from the place of longing. I agree with the poet Christian Wyman when he wrote in his hauntingly beautiful book, My Bright Abyss, quote, "There is an enormous contingent of thoughtful people in this country who, though they are frustrated with the language and forms of contemporary American religion, nevertheless feel that burn of being that drives us out of ourselves, that insistent, persistent gravity of the ghost called God." I think this is right. We are at some tipping point where a naked liberalism that is blind to the needs of the soul is no longer enough. Though our nation's civic vocabulary is no longer haunted by biblical imagery, the words of our neighbors, if you listen closely, are haunted by unquenched aches of the spirit. You see this in progressive communities of justice activists, and you also see it in the YouTube comments of men and their mothers responding appreciatively to Jordan Peterson. You see this haunting, of course, in our politics. For despite many signs of the strength and growth of secularism in the U.S., as a philosophy, secularism has shown severe limitations in its ability to form community and give individuals meaning, identity, contentment, the ability to face suffering. As the late pastor and Christian apologist Tim Keller was wont to say, secularism may not seem as compelling an alternative to religion in the future as it is right now. We human beings just have to have a place to work out our dramas, from guilt to forgiveness, from experiences of rejection to healing. We long for deep and reciprocal connection, horizontally and vertically. But where is this kind of true connection, revelation, and transformation going to happen going forward? Are these inevitable human journeys to be channeled through our politics, on the street, in new cults of Silicon Valley spirituality, in the motivational pep talks at Soul Cycle? I've never been to Soul Cycle, but this is all walking by their windows. Or could it happen once more in the one place that has been granted divine authority to allow God to enter human history? Could it happen once more in the church? So much of my vocational life has found its way to the sacred sector, that faith-informed subset of civil society that has implemented a constructive for this world vision, not a world-resisting one. A vision and a way of life that is necessarily born out of silence and contemplative practice, heterogeneous community, and further up and further in friendship with God. I want to just spray you a little bit as I close here, if you don't mind, with a sampling of these ways of life, as much to capture your own imagination as to make plain where religion right now is finding its best bet, at least in sort of extra institutional wineskins, which I think they do not to displace the institutional church, but as an outflow of currents found too often kind of squelched there as the church proper struggles to figure out its shape in our time and prunes off its dying, sometimes poisoned branches to recover the mustard seed nature of its origins. I want to point you to the Other Side Academy right here in Salt Lake City, a life training school where reformed rascals once chained to their crimes and addictions find in a community of peer-to-peer radical accountability a reason to be free and a process that transforms their moral compass. Thank you, Paul, for introducing me to them so many years ago. I want to point you to the Bruderhof. I think you had a representative there speaking earlier today, an Anabaptist community whose members share all their possessions in common, taking the Beatitudes as literally as they can, a model of an alternative way of we, less I, for the world. I want to point you to the Center for Public Justice, Stephanie Summers is back there, which is bridging intractable political divides in Congress and gracefully weaving together different demographic and temperamental expressions of the sacred sector in local civic variations across the U.S. I want to point you to the Council on Christian Colleges and Universities, which is protecting and nurturing hundreds of universities that seek to develop global citizens who are kind of First Peter resident aliens before they are Americans, alien reconcilers before self-appointed pundits. I want to point you to Shreveport, Louisiana, a city which, once riven by race and socioeconomic difference, is now a living reincarnation of Jane Addams' Settlement House movement through the catalytic presence of Community Renewal International, an organization as much as a neighborly logic that is cultivating a contagion of care that knows no damper in its creative breather and whose founder, 74-year-old Mac McCarter, former pastor, reflects back on this healing tapestry with tears in his eyes and says, "I'm just so grateful I didn't miss the kingdom of God. I could have so easily missed it." I want to point you to Nyack College, now renamed Alliance, a university in Battery Park, New York City that draws its students from the hundreds of storefront churches that line the boroughs beyond Manhattan. A school whose scholastic body is made up of 24% Black, 24% Asian, 24% Latino, 16% international, 11% white, and 1% indigenous students who choose not to express fear that a romanticized Christian heritage is losing ground, but rather live into their own stories of exile with humility, faith, and hospitality, radiating the demands of a beloved community outward to one of the more powerful cities on earth. I want to point you to the Living Hope Wheelchair Association, a Houston-based community organization of immigrants paralyzed by spinal cord injuries who model the way of accompaniment through suffering, drafting the textbook for what our future of responding to natural disasters might require. I want to point you to the cross-racial friendship of Dwan Dandridge and Chris Lambert in Detroit, a Black man and a white man who are laboring arm in arm to break down barriers and build bridges in a city scarred by decades of racially charged neglect, government control and whiplash, and a whole heck of a lot of earned mistrust toward perceived power. I want to point you to Erebon, an organization with the leadership of David Bailey that is helping all kinds of institutions understand that better than diversity, equity, and inclusion mantras and modalities is a much higher, harder, and holier aim of working towards embodying the reconciled community with all the humbling this requires and the mutual transformation this rewards. I want to point you to the San Antonio Police Department, where the model of two hug-a-thug Christians named Ernie Stevens and Joe Smaro, two cops, are shifting a policing conversation and foregoing norms around how we deal with mental health crises and police brutality. I want to point you to Communio, an effort that partners with churches to turn around post-industrial, working-class communities from fearing lifelong commitments like marriage and family to embracing it and to being supported over lifetimes in these commitments. I want to point you to Benedictine monasteries, and I hope this is kosher to say, my own little comment magazine. I want to point you to the AND campaign and City Seminary, and on and on and on and on and on. I could really keep going for many more minutes. These exemplars, communally and institutionally, are really where I get my hope restored. A constellation of kind of lily pads that are less likely to be granted status within the institutional scaffolding of yesteryear, but are shining with strength as they follow the gathering and scattering motif that the Hebrew Scriptures and then the New Testament carved out as the way. They embody what you might call Christian humanism, resourcing a constructive way forward for a just and generous common life for all, a common life that works itself out through a thick web of formative institutions that in turn enable purposeful dialogue and relationship between friends and strangers. What they have in common is unified direction, telos, a clear, strong reason for being in the world, embraced and pursued by all of its members. They have a collective sense of time and liturgies and rituals to bind that time. They invite full engagement by all members of the organization, each one aware of the significance and contribution of their roles. They have a clear conception of the whole person, that we are not just heads on sticks, but that we really do yearn to be integrated beings. They tend to put relational health first, vibrant exchange and connection, the true mark of organizational success. They are careful about the latest technological advance, embracing it insofar as it promotes healthy relationships and individual skill, but setting limits when it makes those objectives more difficult. They foster opportunities to relate to those unlike yourself, and they provide opportunities for growth and a structure of mutual accountability. They empower their people to act, create, and initiate, not simply rest as passive consumers or dehumanizing cogs in a machine. They are life communities, not volunteer societies. And most notably, these organizations just tend to be flooded with joy, transforming lives in their sticky attraction and forming people in such a way that when people leave that context, they promote similar norms in the next one. When I visit these places, either to write a story about them or just to marinate in their kind of countercultural ferment, I often find myself thinking, why can't my life be like this? How do I cultivate these conditions in every sphere in which I live, work, relate, and contribute? Also, why isn't this everywhere? This level of resonance of every person being carried by some relationship. There is no sense of alienation in these communities, not from one another, not from their bodies, not from the world itself. They are not moving overly fast or trying to keep up, but they've learned how to discipline themselves to open up and receive, to receive the surprise gifts of one another and the surprise gifts of God. They are, as children, and in some sense, fully relating to the world in the present as a gift. So how to protect these life communities, how to translate some of the critical yeast they've developed, not so much critical mass, to revive the stale bread of so many of our churches and perhaps other formal religious institutions. I want to close with a final meditation on time as a parting clue as to where churches and religious institutions more broadly might do well to focus their troubleshooting conversations. Historically, up until relatively recently, the praying class was the timekeeping class. Quoting Andrew Root again, this author I quoted earlier, that's what made this band of weirdos so disconcerting to the powerful. The church enacted the narrative of Jesus' final days each week, correlating their own being to Jesus' own time. They gathered for worship and the meal on the first day of the week, the day of his resurrection, which was the giving of a new time. Continuing on with Root's historical recovery here, he writes, the church knew that this new time was radically aimed at something. Time was so full and gathered, the early Christians claimed, that the time the little church was keeping would birth an apocalyptic reality that would shake the Roman Empire to rubble. In time, Jesus would return. This little band of households was now preparing for this eschatological time, recasting pagan sacred time as the time of the death, resurrection, and return of this once dead but now alive Christ. These household gatherings claimed they lived in the time of the Spirit, unthreatened even by death. The time they shared in and anticipated was so full that even death, time's great dark promise, had no claim on them, for even while they were in time, they nevertheless partook in eternity. Today we live in a secular age because sacred time has evaporated, even for devoted believers. For even the pietistic, Jesus is in our hearts, communicating with and affecting our individual wills while we live within the speed of modernity and its thirst for continued acceleration. We live in a secular age because time itself has been emptied of the sacred. This makes the church and its keeping of and attending to the fullness of gathered time unnecessary. And this unnecessariness unmoors the church, leading us to wonder what the church is for at all. Who are we looking to keep time today? I'd rather not have it be Apple or my iPhone or the endless hunger of the inbox or social status. In the words of one of our treasured contributors at Comment Magazine, Margarita Mooney Suarez, she says, the church has an important social dimension, but it can never be restricted to that dimension, as if she were just an idea or a project whose purpose is to change the world. The church is meant to be a home of a people who listen for God's word with hopeful expectation. I want to be able to trust an ecclesial home again, inside which to do this collective listening, to expect with hope. I want to be ready in both cross-sector, cross-denominational coordination, institutional health, but also shared spiritual discernment, to rise up and unite when Rosa Parks gets arrested, when George Floyd gets killed, when liars get elected, when the Asbury outpouring happens, when Jesus walks towards us along the road to Emmaus, revealing himself through stories we once knew, only to recognize him at the last in the breaking of bread. I want to be ready, like Mary, and this time with others, to say yes to the incarnate I am. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's going to give us a lot to talk about. Can you hear me in the back? No. Can you hear me now?
Switch, yeah, throw a switch.
Ah, there we go. That's better? Okay. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you. What a wonderful offering and a rich source for discussion. So why don't we start with Daryl and Bob and then turn it into a conversation? And I'll throw in some questions as well.
Sure. Yes, thank you, Anne, for your words. I appreciate your shout out of Nyack College. We don't get enough love out here, but I'm an alum of that school, so
Amazing.
yeah, so I'm grateful that we get some love today.
I literally wrote on the back, Daryl Paul Lobban seems very cool. Come together with him at UC, and now that I know you went to Nyack, that makes so much sense.
That's exactly why. So as I was thinking about this topic and listening to Anne, specifically her opening line, "Church, where are you?" I think that really struck me in a pretty deep part. As we're thinking about strengthening and renewing, I probably would add another one, which would probably be reviving. Maybe that's because I'm Pentecostal. I always think about revival services. But maybe reviving. How do we revive our religious institutions? And what it brought me to was actually April 16th, 1963, which is when Reverend Dr. King was in a jail cell in Alabama. And he wrote the letter from a Birmingham jail to white clergymen in Alabama. I'll just read one paragraph from it. 'Cause I think it kind of offers a way out to renewal, to revival, to strengthening. He said, "There was a time when the church was very powerful. In that time, when the early church rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early church entered a town, the people in power became disturbed and immediately sought to convict the Christians for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But the Christians pressed on in the conviction that they were a colony of heaven, called to obey God rather than man. Small in number, they were big in commitment. They were too God intoxicated to be astronomically intimidated. By their effort and example, they brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide and gladiatorial contests. Things are different now. So often, the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often, it's an arch defender of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often even vocal sanction of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. I dare say 21st. Every day I meet young people whose disappointment with the church has turned into outright disgust. This was written in 1963, and quite honestly, if this appeared today in the Atlantic or the Post or Wall Street Journal or wherever else you may read, it's pretty accurate about the status of where the church is right now. But he offers a way out, and that is this sacrificial spirit of the church. And I think that is one thing that, from my point of view, after serving in many denominations and seeing churches, we have become a little too comfortable with power. And we have, to a certain extent, as I see it, follow a savior, at least the churches, follows a Christ who is always willing to give up its power. And until we are able to give up our power and give up our status and give up our places that we feel that we are, make us comfortable, and recapture that sacrificial spirit, is when we will actually see that strengthening and renewing of the church, where people will then call us disturbers of the peace and not be so easily consoled by our presence. It's this prophetic voice, this desire to be more like Christ, or more like, And it's not even just like Christ, I will say. I think for all the major religions, more like his founders, if we can recapture that spirit, I think that is one way to renew and to strengthen. And maybe that's because I come from Holiness Pentecostal, which is a little restorationism. We kind of look back to move forward in some regard. But I think that is how we can really move our religious institutions to regaining that authenticity that we so need. I'll close by these words from another mystic, actually the mentor to Dr. King. His name was Howard Thurman. He founded one of the first interracial churches. They're talking about the 1950s in California. He founded an interracial church. He wrote this book called Jesus and the Disinherited. And his opening line, I believe was in the first pages, he says, "What does the religion of Jesus have to say to those whose backs are against the wall?" That is the question that I think will bring renewal. It's in answering that question that will bring renewal and strengthen our religious institutions, where we can go back to our first principles and really lean into those core values. Will we then see, I believe, some renewal and some strength and revival, I dare say.
So I'm a reporter, and I report bad news, as they were talking about earlier. I don't really like to, so if you could just tell your people, don't do stupid things, then I won't report them. So I might be the most hopeful person here, maybe in this. I'm both. So when the first speakers talked about being mostly, right? Mostly. I am mostly hopeful and mostly terrified. And here's why. I spent a lot of time, I'm a religion reporter. I'm not a pastor, so I don't have a theological background. I know a little bit of theology, but I think I mostly study how things work and what people do. It's really hopeful, even COVID was hopeful, to see how many churches did so many things for their neighbors. In the little town I live in, the food pantry shut down because they lost their lease. So these little tiny churches said, we still got all these people who need food. All right, we're going to put it in our parking lot. And one church had a parking lot, one church had some people, and they organized it in like 5 minutes. And they had done it, they feed like 300 or 400 people every week, a whole meal for a week. They do all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of stuff. There's a great report on this. There's several great reports at the Hartford Institute for Religion Research about what churches during COVID. Lots of great things happen. Okay, we've heard all these great things that religious groups do. They are really centers of many of our communities, despite their failings. So I spent last week with Southern Baptist Convention, actually the last few days. You might have heard they do all kinds of, it was contentious meeting. You go to the meeting, you go like, these people, what are they going to do? But if a tornado hits your house, then the Southern Baptists will show up, and they will take the tree off, and they will clean it up, and they will just show up. And the Latter-day Saints will show up, and the Methodists will show up, and everybody and their brother will show up, and they run. This is what, even despite all our flaws, religious people run to help their neighbors. And not only do that, they think about their neighbors, and they think, our neighbor is going to be in trouble, so they plan. Organized religion is great because it's organized. You get people together, you tell them they're not so great, but they got to be better, and then you send them out to make the world a better place. And then you collect money from them, and you got their phone number. So you can call them and say, hey, you got to go do this thing. And you can set up classes. Like when a disaster hits, when there's a hurricane, all these different faith-based groups who they disagree about all kinds of things except for helping their neighbors, they've got logistics. They're going to ship material and food, and one group gets the food, and one group cooks it, and one group hands it out, and they do all this stuff. It's wonderful. They do this, the quote from Eva Patel this morning, right? All this social good that gets done. It could all be gone in the next 20 years because we are in the middle of a complete disintegration of congregational life in America. So I've been reporting for religion almost 25 years. So 25 years next year. So when I started in 1999, The average congregation in America, the median sized congregation, had 137 people. Got 137 people, you can pay a clergy person if you pay them. You can do a bunch of programs. You got enough people to keep things going. You might have a youth pastor. You got all stuff going. You fix the roof. The average congregation today, according to the Faith Communities Today study, has 65 people, median size. So half the congregations in the country have less than 65 people. And they're trying to do everything they used to do when they had 137. So then you're not paying the pastor very much. You only got one. You're not fixing the roof. Everyone's exhausted. And the abyss is getting closer. If you got 30 people, 20 people, all of a sudden you cannot, this is an unsustainable path, right? This is what we're on. And we look at the big picture. So in America, Christianity is declining. Pew Research did a great study projecting and I talk about Christianity is the biggest religion in America, right? That sector. So they looked at what it's going to look like by 2070. And they said, let's just look at death rates and birth rates, right? So how old your congregation is, how old your people are, how many kids they got, what's their life expectancy, and then whether people leave, and how many people leave and how many people join. So, small fact, big surprise. If you got a lot of old people and no babies, your congregations are going to decline. If more people leave than join, you're going to be in decline. It's math, and the math is not good. So, in 1970s, about 90% of people said they were Christian. About 3 or 4% say they were Jewish or another faith. So now it's about 2/3 say they're Christian. By 2070, less than half will say they're Christian. Probably about 46% if the current rate of quitting, of switching, right? So people leaving versus staying stays the same. If more people start leaving and more people, then it's going to get to about 39%. The other folks will be about 13% will be people of non-Christian faiths, like especially Hinduism and Islam, because they have a lot of kids and they're younger. And the rest will be nones, none of the above. So there's no mathematical formula that's going to show that this get better. So if the problem was that the churches were doing terrible things and not being prophetic, that would be easier to fix. These are external factors of demographics, of a lack of trust in institutions. The people don't join anything, right? They don't join your church because they don't join anything. We're isolated from each other. And they hate people who are not like them. People only want to be near people who look like them, believe like them, think like them, vote like them. Well, that's not the country. So you're only going to want to have people. And we tell you, we hate the other side. I was watching a sermon, pastor spent the first half on the next election, we got to win or those people are going to take our church away, your life away. I won't tell you which denomination it was because it could be whoever, right? They could have been progressive or very conservative. And then they said, we're going to start do a big outreach to the community. And I thought, you just told all your people that we hate you if you're not here. And they could come and tell you about Jesus, but they're like, Jesus is fine, but you are terrible. So my whole point of this is there's an urgency. Like there is no time for nonsense anymore. There's no time for arguing and thinking about and waiting. The congregations in America, and they all collapse, and the other thing that's happening is we've had the Walmart effect of churches, okay? So if you go to a church or worship service, you generally go to a big congregation. So 10% of the congregations have 60% of the people, right? So if you have how many of you have been to go to a congregation that has 120 people in it? Okay, you're in the biggest churches in America. That's what a big church is, 120 people, right? What used to be a normal-sized church. So, and most people go to a congregation that has 300 or 400 people. So they think everything's great, right? Everything's great at my church. There's 300,000 churches like this. No, there's like 30,000, and the rest are going to shut down. So why do I say all these things? Because congregations matter. The work that people do matters. They hold their communities together. When people fall down, they help them up. Right? My favorite. Can Can I give one Bible story? Got a minute? Good. All right, got a minute. So my favorite Bible story, actually I have two. My favorite Bible story is the one where the guys yell at the bald man and the bears chase them. That's a great story. But my other favorite story is, it's from Luke, right? So Luke, there's Jesus teaching in a house, there's a bunch of people there. And all of a sudden the roof caves in and they lower a guy down, right? There's a guy on a paralytic. So I always thought the lesson there is don't invite Jesus to your house, right? Because the roof will get broken. But there's a professor named Arbor Adele who wrote this essay for a magazine I used to edit. He talked about this story is that what happens in this story. These people knew their friend was in trouble and he couldn't walk. So they took him to get help. They held surrogate faith for him. They acted in a way, and this is what congregations do. If your mother dies, when my younger brother died, people wrapped around us. This is years ago, right? When there's a crisis in your life, we hold each other. When you can't believe that the world could be better, these congregations hold it for each other. They hold people together. They hold their community. They believe for their communities that things can get better. But this could all be gone. And it could be, and it's not in your, so there's two things that need to happen. One is there has to be a realization that that things are on fire. And the first thing you do when things are on fire, don't throw gas on it, right? There's a great proverb from Star Trek, only a fool fights in a burning house. And we can see a lot of people fighting in our burning houses. And when they get done fighting, there's not gonna be anything left. And the second thing is to say, what have we done wrong? Okay, let's not do those things. And then you do slow revitalization. And I do a lot of reporting on communities that are revitalized. It's always the same. Spiritual formation, community development, reach out to your neighbors. It's slow. So here's the thing about the early church. There's a sociology of the early church. Rodney Stark writes about this. The early church, we think they got this message and they went out and changed the world. They also did some other things. They practiced this religion they met. They had kids and they passed it on to them. And then they invited more people to show, and then they had kids. And they just kept doing this for centuries, and all of a sudden, they were the dominant, they changed the face of the Roman Empire by slow, steady. It would be so much easier if there were 5 steps. And I was talking I'll close by, I was talking to a Baptist leader. He works with a bunch of rural churches in rural Louisiana. Some of them have 3 people, some of them have 300. They're all barely hanging on. He said, I get all these books. They say, if I get a pastor with skinny jeans and a rock band, everything will be better. No, it's not going to get better. There's no simple solution. But there are time-tested congregational development things that's just slow, steady, be faithful, and realize it's going to be a long haul. And your neighbors need you. They don't trust you. They need you to be faithful. They need you to keep going. And they need you to not hate them. And do that over a long period of time. And when you do terrible things, say, what is the whole point of the Christian faith? Right? You open up the Bible, what's the first thing you read? God makes everything. He makes these people, they're awful. Right? They do the thing he tells them not to do, and then they have kids and they start killing each other, right? So the message is, you're pretty awful, but God loves you. There's a better way to be better. Don't be terrible. So I wanted to call my book, Making the World Less Awful, which is what religion does. It doesn't always make it better, but it makes less awful, because we're awful people. And we don't need to make the world worse. And too many of us are making it worse, and I think you're gonna ruin it for all of us. And when we are in need, right? When the hurricane hits, when the fire hits, when people's lives are falling apart, there will be no one. Because secular people are wonderful. They're not organized, right? They call them the nuns because they don't do anything, right? They're nuns. They're none of the above. Like, they're not married. So it's like they can't do the thing. They don't have the power of a religion. The president of BYU called it, they don't create the kind of necessary infrastructure to take these ideas and put them into concrete steps that help your neighbors and make the world better and not so awful. So we could lose this all. And I as a reporter, I'm like, don't do that. Choose to be the people who run to help your neighbors. Choose the people who say, like, I think that maybe I could be terrible to my neighbor, but maybe I won't. Maybe it'd be better if we didn't do that. It's not hard. It's hard. It's not simple, right? But if we buy into all the stuff going on, the polarization, then the kind of thing that the faith-based groups do, which is make the world less awful, instead you become arsonists. And we don't need any more arsonists. We just don't. And I don't get to preach. I'm not a preacher. I'm a reporter. But just stop. I feel like Mr. Incredible, right? Please stop, because you don't know how much harm happens when you are an arsonist and when all these institutions close and there's no one there to show up when you show up. And Martin Luther King changed the world, right? There's a great book, Parting the Waters. The first part is how organized he got his church in Montgomery. It was disorganized mess. He got them organized and got them ready. And then when something hit, they had people who could go out and do the work. And if you aren't organized and you aren't ready, if you don't have the institutions, then when the need strikes, there's nobody there. So.
Thank you, Bob. I think you're a new preacher.
No, please no.
Well, I want to give Anne a chance to respond to these, and then you all get some last comments in before we have to wrap up. But I just wanted to throw a question in as well, for what it's worth. I appreciate, Anne, how you were talking about the challenge of sort of moving from modernist ideas of authenticity or choice into the strictures of an institution. I mean, and so my question, and you see this particularly in Gen Z and millennials who are leading the charge in terms of being nuns, right? Yeah. So how do you communicate with them? How do you help people whose minds are shaped by, modernist cultures of authenticity and self to go to a place where they lose themselves, right? Where they become part of a larger whole, to have that vision. I mean, how do we do that? So you can respond to that, respond to them, and then we'll give everyone a chance to join in. But I'll give you all the easy questions.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't feel I'm going to have a great answer. I think probably a lot of parents in the room would know far better than I. The answer to that, I think just in my own experience, I try to run to the pain that it's allowing a place for the pain of it, once there's some trusted relationship established, for that sort of identity fragility to be expressed. And then I still haven't met a human being, I don't care how glassy-eyed and cool they seem and detached and not wanting to engage, I just still haven't met a human being that when placed in around a table or in the outdoors with a group of people, solving a shared problem or enjoying natural beauty, doesn't actually start to see the value of the sort of logic of this community is saving me and therefore I need to save the community. So that's just my impulsive response to you. Maybe as a bridge, I'm really, both of you, thank you, and your quotes were just beautiful, both Thurman and King, Daryl. And I was laughing, my husband's a journalist, and I was hearing all the stats you were throwing out, and I took out a bunch of numbers I was going to put up there, but every time I share with my husband who's a journalist, what I might be saying, he's like, you have a number in there, I'm so proud of you. So you brought them all, I'm really grateful for that. A part of what I was trying to do, and I'm obviously grappling out loud here, and maybe I went a little too philosophical, is this question of is it the institution's fault and or ours? Because institutions are funny things. Yes, they require great leaders. They are embedded in histories, subcultures within them. But they're also a little bit amorphous because individuals, they don't exist in a vacuum because they are made up of individuals. And there could be someone who's a member, not even the leader, who suddenly has courageous initiative and generosity, and that changes the tone of the whole thing. I mean, if the show Ted Lasso is about anything, it's about cultural change, if any of you are into that show. So so much of my agony, frankly, the last number of years of like, church, where are you? Has been going to this question of organization and coordination. But the reason I started thinking more about time, which maybe was a bit unexpected in what I said, was I'm trying to be honest about how disaggregated I think many of our lives are today, and what that means in terms of the burdens, like what it means we need out of the place of worship and out of the place of community service and out of the place of communion. So I'm just curious how either of you just think about, in terms of institutional revival, like, yes, how do institutions reshape themselves for this era, but also there's some level of kind of humbling of our own desires and conveniences and addiction to comfort, et cetera, and privacy and all those things that needs to occur. And it seems like kind of a messy yin and yang. I'm just.
Please go.
So, no, I thought your talk was great. This is philosophical, and I'm a reporter. I'm like, give me some numbers. Oh, give me some numbers. Like, but the time thing was great because our lives are so empty. They get eaten up by the phone. They get eaten up. There's no sense of meaning and time and regularity, and that was really important. One thing that's super interesting, there's a great book called The Next America, which is a Pew research. It's a few years old, but it's super helpful. That younger people they like their grandparents. They may not agree with their parents, they like their parents. They like older people. There's not the hostility there have been in past generations. And one thing that you can do is keep grandparents, especially older folks, is keep faith for those kids and those younger people. There's a guy named Vern Bankston wrote this book on how faith is passed from generation to generation. And his dad had been a pastor, and he became an atheist, and then he became religious late in life. So he told me once that prodigals come home. But he also said that, like, a warm family relationship that especially older people can give to people to say, like, you could try that new thing. Okay, do that. Or you have these ideas. All right, I don't hate you for that. I love you. The kind of listening and saying you could be right, and what older folks could do to their young folks is give them permission to figure things out and give people permission to try new things, and don't say we can never do that. We never did that before, and give people, folks that don't come, they know that you don't love them or you don't love their friends. I got 20-year-olds, right? They got a lot of LGBT friends, right? If people who don't like their friends, they're not gonna trust them, right? You don't have to make everything about conforming people right now. That this kind of belief in people and the kind of, there are the idea part, and there's also just the human part that we're not really good at. That your kid wants to go march in the street, okay. You might keep them safe, right? When we went to my kid and I went to report on the George Floyd marches, she went. She wanted to march down to the police station, where I thought, the march is over, and now there's a bunch of people who are really angry going, you're not going there, right? You're gonna go march in this. This is super important. My wife has gone to the Pride thing with our kids because it's important to them. Okay, we're just gonna go and be present and listen and give people time to figure this out. Because it's a very confusing world, right? The world we had as young people was a little more ordered. It still had all kinds of terrible problems. It was a little more predictable. Now everything's predictable. Everything has changed all at once, all at the same time. And our kids are left with the world that they have a lot of the past stuff that gave people anchors is gone, and a lot of new stuff they just have to figure out. And they want to love their friends, and they want to do this. So give them more, and then give them things like, hey, you could take some sacred time. That there are options here, but give them time to find them.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide how to enter the conversation. I don't know if I want to enter in as the resident millennial on this panel.
Right.
Yeah, I think churches and religious institutions are going through this moment of renewal, and I guess I'll speak as the resident millennial, and trying to understand, as I'm always trying to understand, like, what makes my friends want to go to church, right? What makes them want to give up their time and definitely their money and all that good stuff to be located in the faith. And I think the one thing that the church offers and religious institutions offers, and I'm not the first to say this, I mean, it's in Bowling Alone, it's in all the books, right, is this sense of community. This, so I grew up in a Holiness Pentecostal church, and if you don't know what Holiness Pentecostal means, it's like, there's like, you're saved, and there's like super saved. The Holiness Pentecostal are the super saved. I mean, folks, to use that language. So, you know, there was very traditional values in the church. No sex before marriage. Some people couldn't even go to prom and all that stuff. My parents didn't try that with me because I would have snuck out the house and went. But you know, it was a very, you know, religious, traditional place. But you know, throughout the course of life and teenage years, and some of the kids, a couple of them end up getting married outside of wedlock. That's the language they use. And certainly there'll be this moment of disappointment, but that moment will last literally like 10 seconds. The next moment they're moving on to like, I guess we have a baby shower to plan for you, right? And bring them right back into the community of faith, right? And I think that's what I think made the early church very powerful. Because if you read the book of Corinthians, God help you, they were crazy. Talk about weird and wild, and just in your private time, just read Corinthians, and you're going to say, whoa, are these folks, do they even know the Lord, right? But I think it was this sense of community, this idea of always bringing folks back in. That, yes, you may have messed up, yes, you may have slipped at this moment, but as long as there's a way back home, this prodigal idea, as long as you always open the door back home, I think that's one way in which we will see renewal. I think for many years, we have many different traditions kind of kicked people out and then wonder, like, how come no one's here? Well, because kick them out, right? But as long as there's a way back home, sounds like Spider-Man, way back home. I'm a youth pastor, so I have to watch Spider-Man, unfortunately. But as long as there's a way back home, I think that helps strengthen and will bring some renewal to religious institutions. Theology, we will figure out. That's not why people, and I'm a student of history, this is my last comment. Most churches do not split over theology. That's just normally the excuse, right? A lot of times, it's really just bad behavior. This person not liking that person. And I say that just to say that as long as we are fostering this idea of community and we will see, I think, some renewal in the religious marketplace, if you will.
Well, sadly, our time is gone, but it's been a fabulous panel. Thank you all. Please join me one more time. Thank you.